Hello, kia ora, I'm Philip Duncan. Thanks for joining me as we take a look at the forecast for the week ahead and the upcoming weekend. And high pressure is certainly the main feature at the moment, although because we're not perfectly underneath it, we have the southerly portion with the polar airflow coming right up to the far north at times with that southerly wind, which has been very strong through Wellington over the weekend. Gale force with showers, low temperatures in our capital city and southern parts of Wairarapa. Today those winds start to ease back. They're still around, but they ease back from where they've been over the weekend. Showers, in fact, mostly this morning around Wellington, Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. Dry in many other areas, or mostly dry. We may see a couple of showers around the Bay of Islands where the winds turn more easterly between that low up in the tropics, or subtropics I should say, and the incoming powerful area of high pressure. So on the situation, this is the misery index. In red, 30 degrees and above. In the blue, 0 and below. So you can see this evening we're back to 0 through the Southern Alps and nearby and around the Central Plateau. So colder weather as a result of that southerly flow, which is perhaps tilting a little more southeasterly for the very top part of the country with that low pressure zone nearby. But the high, that is moving into the South Island and growing. So that's going to alter the airflow around the country over the next few days. But it is still going to be cold. Tuesday morning, frosty weather right up to about the Bombay Hills, Coromandel Peninsula. You may see a few isolated frosts into Auckland and Northland, but the heavy stuff, Central Plateau and through the Southern Alps. That southerly breeze stopping some of those frosts from getting to the coastline. As we go through to Wednesday, as the high pressure comes in and the winds fade out, see those frosts going all the way to the coastal zones right around the South Island. So frosty on Wednesday. In the North Island, still a bit of a breeze blowing around on the edges of that high. We will see a few frosts around, but not looking too major for this time of the year. Waikato, we're starting to see frost returning there. Hasn't been the frostiest this year, but the frosts, compared to, makes me sound old, but when I was a kid back in the 90s, the frosts were -4, -5 around places like Morrinsville, and lately we just have not seen that for the last couple of years. So high pressure rolls in on Tuesday. Southerly winds around, that's why we don't see frosts on Tuesday morning in the east in many places. Most of those showers are around the eastern side of the North Island, still clipping Wellington though, and potentially still around some parts of Canterbury. The low to the north is still there tomorrow. It's not very big. The high is more powerful, although the high does shrink a little bit on Tuesday and even more so on Wednesday, but at the same time it's coming in over the top of us. So you don't really notice that. What you will is the frost, as I said, widespread on Wednesday around the South Island, but a bit of an easterly breeze and a few showers in the east up and around the Bay of Islands as well as Hawke's Bay and maybe Wairarapa and Gisborne areas, getting a few showers with that easterly flow on the top edge, on the northern edge of the high. But the polar line is still up north of Whangarei. So this is still very cold weather coming through this week. It's not as extreme as previous years, as I just mentioned, but certainly temperatures are down. You'll have the fire burning for longer, the heaters going, all that kind of stuff as we go through this week. And more frost again on Thursday morning, mostly in the South Island, but still the North Island inland areas. Central Plateau, around the hills and ranges there, a lot of frosty weather is expected, fading out as you come up to about Auckland. So noon Thursday, high pressure is basically centred over Australia and the Tasman Sea, and we're on the edges of it. That's why we've still got the colder airflow, again, right up to the far north. Hello to our viewers in Kaitaia and northwards. Still cold air for you on Thursday. Mostly dry around New Zealand, just a couple of coastal showers here and there. The big low up in the subtropics moving away from us, so even though it's a little stormier, it's not a problem for us. High pressure is the main feature as we go in towards the weekend, but we're not finished with subtropical energy. So you're hearing all the talk about La Nina at the moment, or some of you may have heard of that. Keep in mind, last year, it was talked about for over a year by NIWA here in New Zealand, and it never happened. So just park that how you will. But it's measured, La Nina is measured up in the equator, and we're halfway from the equator to Antarctica. So just because things are changing up in this part of the world doesn't necessarily draw a straight line to us. But these subtropical lows are a little unusual for this time of the year because it is typically the dry season up around Queensland and Fiji and Vanuatu, and you're seeing these big rainmakers. So look, the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia, who were the accurate ones last year about La Nina, they were on the fence about it all year, saying it doesn't look that likely, whereas in New Zealand, our government was saying it's coming in. So we're watching what the Australians are saying very closely. They seem to be monitoring it well. There is a bit of chatter that La Nina might be forming in spring. If that happens, lows like this one or rainmakers like this one are more frequent. But whether or not they hit New Zealand is a whole different question, because as you know, these lows drop down at various places with high pressure in between. And it's these highs in the New Zealand area that can completely push those lows away, and they don't even affect us. So it's not just a straight line that lows form up here in La Nina and New Zealand gets rain. If it was as simple as that, gosh, it would be a lot easier to do weather forecasting. So we're just watching that as we go into the weekend. Now on Saturday, low pressure remains to the north, very messy kind of stuff. So no storm up there, it's just some thunderstorms, but not actually a storm itself. High pressure moving out to the east. And now the winds do the old switcheroo. Now we're seeing subtropical airflows coming down towards New Zealand and moving into the North Island. And that is pushing the polar line, which is kind of messy, but the cold air just sort of comes in through here. That area is now being pushed southwards and eastwards ahead of the northwesterly winds and the subtropical nor'easters. So it's being pushed away as we go into the weekend. But look what happens on Sunday. The polar blue line, this is it here over the Chatham Islands, gets pushed away. So this is the cold stuff over here. But now you see an even larger cold change coming into Australia with a low pressure zone in the middle of it. That's not very stormy, but it's more about the size of that cold change. It's going up to Queensland. So that is the one that we were talking about the other day about, is there a storm coming for the following Tuesday? So here is still the map. August the 19th. This is still not locked in. This has moved around a lot over the last week. But it's kind of going back to some degree to their origins, which is a big cold southerly flow where the polar line goes north of New Zealand. That doesn't happen too often. It does happen a few times a year, but it doesn't happen all the time. And so that indicates much colder air coming through. One important change, and I mentioned this last week when I talked about this, Matt, the high pressure zone around Tasmania makes all the difference. If it's a rugby ball shaped north to south like you're about to kick it, then that drags up really cold southerly air. If it's sort of circular shape or looks like the rugby ball is lying flat on the ground, then we get a sideways westerly. It looks more sideways now than it did the other day. It doesn't look long where it's pulling up that Antarctic air. So you track the southerlies around New Zealand, and once you get down to about the Auckland Islands, they're westerlies coming out of Australia. So while it is cold, it is not an Antarctic blast, which is much colder and brings snow to sea level. The snow level here at this stage looks about 400 meters. So it's not extremely low, but that's where some of the heavier snow may fall, maybe a little bit lower than that as we get through to next week. So we're still going to lock that in, not locked in, but we are monitoring it closely, because obviously the closer we get to spring, the more lambs are being born and calves as well. So we've got to make sure that livestock, or at least the farmers who are looking after the livestock, get a good, decent heads up. That is all from me for today. Have yourselves a great week. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.